do, and the prophet says, God's real clear about that. God says we're supposed to seek justice. God says we're supposed to love kindness. God says we are supposed to walk humbly with and partner with our God in doing God's work in the world. And so today we're going to return one more time to this whole notion about how choices affect justice. And today we're going to talk about it in terms of how much we buy and how much we discard, and how that can affect our world in so many different ways. Now, my guess is that at least a few of us, as we were growing up, had parents whose mantra was waste not, want not. How many of you can remember that? Yep. In our house, for example, you did not, under any circumstances, ever waste food. And so my sister and I were each permitted to pick one food item. Mine was beets at the time. You didn't ever get to change it, and that was the one food, if it was served, you could leave on your plate. You didn't have to eat any of that. Everything else you ate. And if you were ever insane enough to make a terrible comment about the food on your plate, like, ew, that looks icky, you were immediately sent from the table. Food was a gift. Food was a blessing, and you didn't waste it in any way. I know a lot of you know what I'm talking about. And I know a lot of you also remember that back in the day, when a toy got broken, well, I was going to rip its arm off, but it's not my toy, so I better not. But a toy got broken, you didn't just throw it away. If Dad broke a hammer, the handle broke, you didn't throw it away. If the blanket edging got all worn out, you didn't throw it away. You mended things. You repaired things. You kept using things until they got to the point they absolutely could not be used anymore. Until the toy finally fell completely apart. Until the hammer had got to the point you just could not put another handle on it. And to the point where every time you cut it off and rebound it, the blanket finally got so small it ended up in the dog's bed. A lot of us remember that. And others of us are sitting there going, nah, not really. Well, that was the old days, you know, back in the 1800s when we were all younger. And it's not surprising that people younger than some of the rest of us think that's kind of a quaint, old-fashioned habit, because in the between 200,000 and 2 million years human beings have been on the earth, and the estimates vary depending on how you define human being, but in however long, the very long time spent, just the last few decades that most of us have been around, our culture has managed to convince us that everything is disposable. That having a new something is always better than having an old something. And to quote Aldous Huxley in Brave New World, that ending, throwing stuff out, is better than mending. And so today, the broken toy goes into the trash can and into the landfill. And the broken hammer, or the one that got, you know, kind of scratched up on the handle so it doesn't look shiny and new, or the blanket that is so last year's color, go into the landfill too. We throw stuff out. And that attitude that everything is disposable leads to some very, very bad news for us personally, and for our planet, and for our society, and for a whole lot of other people we share this world with. Like the fact that the United States produces more trash per person than any other nation in the world. That the average adult in the United States produces 4.5 pounds of garbage a day. That the average person in the United States throws out nearly 400 pounds of food a year. And since I know that Bob and I really don't produce that much garbage, and I know some of you are really mindful and you're not producing that, it means there are some folks somewhere who are producing even more than that amount. In the last 50 years, the amount of solid waste in this country has very nearly tripled. Over 50 years. That is extraordinary how much stuff we're throwing out. And if you're thinking, well, I don't throw things away. You remember the leftover pizza that you were going to get to and never did? Or you remember the grapes? You bought the grapes, you had some of them for lunch, and then they kind of got in the back of the fridge, and when you rediscovered them, they were covered with green fur. Or maybe, how many of you get catalogs in the mail that you have not ordered and you've never ordered from any of these companies? I mean, we get zillions of these things, and I keep writing into there are places you can write to and say, take me off the list, and they do, and then new ones start showing up. Or our piles of newspaper, or all that mail we get that's sent to occupant that we have to do something with, or the cardboard boxes that the new toy, or the new hammer, or the new blanket came in, or all the other stuff that we throw out day after day after day, most of the time without even thinking about it. Well, it's, shoot, trash. We've got a lot of it. And we've got to get rid of it because we don't want to live with it in our houses. Now, perhaps a few of you are sitting here wondering, so it's just garbage. Who cares? And why should this be a faith issue for us in any way? And there are lots of answers to those questions, but those of you who have been reading Julie Clausen's book on everyday justice, or who are planning on reading it, she offers just one example of why this should matter. And she shares, this is a true story, she shares a story that was first released to the press in 2008. I'd never heard of this, and I'd be willing to bet the majority of you never heard about this either, except maybe Joe Graham, and I'll come back to why Joe Graham in a minute. This should have been international news. There was a sailor, recreational sailor, who was the heir to an oil fortune, ironically. His name's Charles Moore, and he was in this yacht race from Los Angeles to Hawaii. And on the way back home from Hawaii, he decided to take a different route through the ocean than he'd taken coming, a route that a lot of people do not sail through because it's an area where the ocean currents are extremely slow. It's called the Northern Gyre, or Gyre. I'm looking at Joe because he's an oceanographer. And as he starts to sail into this patch of the ocean that nobody has been sailing through, he found himself surrounded by masses of plastic rubbish. This huge floating pool of plastic garbage of all kinds that he sailed through day after day after day for a week. There is not just one, but two of these enormous pools of plastic garbage out in the Pacific. They're called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And there is the Eastern Great Pacific Garbage Patch and the Western Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And all told, this massive pile of floating plastic is twice the size of the continental United States. That's a lot of leftover milk bottles. And it is, because it doesn't biodegrade, it's projected to triple in size in the next 10 years. Folk were dumping way too much stuff, and he was so stunned finding this thing that he went home, sold his business, became a researcher and an environmental activist, started trying to figure out where all this stuff was coming from, because the first assumption would be, well, it's all those cruise ships. And despite the fact that laws were passed in 1988 saying that cruise ships and people who work on oil derricks and stuff can't dump their garbage, people are still doing it right and left, but only 1/5 of it comes from cruise ships. The other 4/5 comes from you and me. Comes from people who live on the land. And this huge pool is not only just unsightly and really kind of nasty looking and gross, it's lethal. Because as oceanographers have started studying the effects They're finding that over 100,000, and it's hard to measure because you can't really go out and census all the marine mammals and see how many there are at the beginning of the year and then at the end, but at least 100,000 animals a year, sea animals, are being killed. They see a floating plastic syringe and they eat it because they think it's food, or they see a floating baggie and they eat it because they think it's food, and it kills them. So we're killing all these animals. And not only killing all these animals, we are endangering ourselves. Because this stuff, the plastics break down, the hydrocarbons in the plastics break down. There are millions of pounds, new word, nurdles. Nurdles are little tiny pellets they make plastic products out of. Nurdles absorb other kinds of chemicals. They get eaten by the fish, and in this case they don't kill them. What they do is they end up on our plate when we're having our really nice Friday night fish fry. And I could give you 80 gazillion more examples of environmental destruction, but I'm not going to do that because I want to talk about the second kind of justice issue we've been talking about, which is how all of this garbage we're throwing out is affecting other people. I mean, obviously, if we're going to be affected, our air and our water is affected, so is the air and water that everybody else has. In addition to which, all those folks who try to make a living fishing are losing their livelihoods. They're eating food that's poisoned. And that's all really bad enough because they don't have much control of it. It's our garbage, it's not their garbage. In the last few years, we've raised the bar on what we're willing to do to other people because we decided a few years back, and part of the initial goal was philanthropic, where we decided that if the stuff was too hazardous to dump in our country, we'd send it elsewhere, particularly electronic waste. It's the fastest growing segment of garbage in this country. We throw out every day, not every year, every day about 130,000 computers. 130,000 computers and about 270,000 cell phones every day. And we can't just put it in the landfill because we actually have the science to know that it's going to cause all kinds of problems for us. So we put it on cargo ships and we ship it off to Africa and to Asia. Just one example of this. There was a Frontline documentary a couple of years ago about Ghana. And any of the stuff, you can go into the internet, you can look it up, you can actually look at this film. It's on YouTube. Ghana and West Africa started out with this philanthropic effort that we were going to help them come into the industrial age, and so businesses started sending them used computers. Unfortunately, as time went on, businesses and school districts kept sending used computers, more and more and more and more of which were broken, unusable, completely out of date, totally worthless, but we didn't want the garbage piling up over here, so we sent it to Ghana. And if you watch this documentary, it's about 20 minutes long, what you see is little children, the age of your kids, or your grandkids, or for some of you, your great-grandkids. And in the city of their township that they live in is this enormous garbage heap with burning computers, burning foam. Kids are playing soccer in the middle of all this toxic waste. And because it's a very poor country, they also scrounge after the fire is out. They scrounge for bits of copper and bits of iron that burn out of these computers to try and make just a little bit of money. We've done that by some choices that we made. And I know there is not a single person sitting in here this morning who would take your computer out to your backyard or your friend's backyard or your grandkid's backyard and set it on fire and let children you know play in that and then run